Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Nate Winans and I'm the marketing manager at Federal Compass. A quick note about who we are. We are a software platform for government contractors. Our platform is designed to help enable strategy, growth, and process for federal contractors and the federal market. Built by federal market intel pioneers, Federal Compass is designed to help federal contractors answer their most pressing questions. A quick rundown of today's presentation. If you have any questions throughout the session, please use the chat feature inside of Zoom. I will do my best to answer questions throughout the session, but if there are any that go unanswered, there will be time at the end to answer them in the order they were asked. Today's presentation will be recorded, and you will receive that recording when it comes available. Today's speakers for our How to Engage with Your Targeted Agencies Before a Solicitation webinar include Jim Sherwood and Ashley Duwel. Jim is the Chief Product Officer here at Federal Compass and has over 15 years of experience building and delivering market intelligence solutions for federal contractors. At Input, Jim was responsible for managing and modernizing their federal market intelligence products. He later worked for Wolfden Associates, where he managed a strategic, focused market intelligence consulting practice. His experience with both subscription products and consulting engagements has provided him with unique insights into the complex and dynamic needs that exist in today's federal marketplace. Our other speaker is Ashley Duwel, CEO of Duwel Dev LLC. Ashley's goal is to help federal contractors build stronger, more meaningful relationships with their government and commercial clients. From marketing design to creating custom strategic sales plans, they seek to help satisfy your government contracting needs. Monotonous tasks that often hinder productivity, like design, market research, outreach, registration management, and certifications, can all be handled by Ashley and her team. Ashley, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And some key takeaways from today's discussion include why researching your customers ahead of time matters, the importance of knowing and understanding who your customers are, why registering in SAM competitively matters, completing a robust DSBS profile, developing a compelling capability statement for your target audience, and engaging ahead of the solicitation, aka scheduling meetings. So with that, Jim, I kick it over to you.
Thank you very much, Nate. And Ashley, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. I think this topic is probably one of the more important topics that I've talked about on recent webinars. It's certainly, it hits up there with your BD processes and your internal processes of the things that you must check off the list in order to be successful within this market. And so if you don't mind, I'd really like to give you the floor just so you could tell us a little about your journey to where you are now.
Sure. Thank you, Jim, for having me, and Nate for the introduction. I started in government contracting a little over a decade ago. Full transparency, I started in a sales job. So for those of you who are registered in SAM, the third parties that call you and try to convince you that there's something wrong with your registration. And, through self-education, I realized pretty quickly that what I was being taught was not necessarily the best advice that I should be portraying. So that kind of kicked off this learning process, and I continue to maintain my CPE credits and provide strategic assistance and support to small businesses. It's not an easy marketplace to navigate, but I mean, we're blessed that we have a lot of data that backs up our decision making, and that's really where successful strategies start. So that's where most of my interest has lied within the past several years, is really in the data and developing the path of least resistance based on what the market research says.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Ashley. And what a great segue, because I really wanted to start by offering up our audience, one way to avoid some pitfalls out there. And previously, me and you had a conversation where you mentioned fly-by-night experts. And I'd certainly like to hear your thoughts on that, because obviously what your company does, right? Very specialized, very important. But unfortunately, you guys swim in the same waters with some of these fly-by-night experts. So I really wanted you to take some time out to help people understand what they need to avoid and what they should be looking for when they're looking for a company like yours?
That's a great question. What I've seen most recently, especially since COVID, is you'll have, whether it's a contractor or self-proclaimed expert, maybe they got lucky once and now they've created a course and they're going to teach you how to do it too. Some of the advice that's being given, and not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, will frankly get you into trouble. There are a lot of social media content that's floating around out there encouraging small businesses to become a pass-through. Oh, you don't have to do anything, just sit on the beach and submit the invoice and let the subs do all the work. Well, that's realistically only in a very small percentage of cases where you would be allowed to do that, and certain circumstances must exist. All it really takes is one protest. You know, if you're following that strategy, it only takes one protest from your competitor, and you could essentially end up getting debarred. So my best advice would not be, I have a lot of folks who will say, well, how many contracts have you won? It's really not about the amount of contracts that you've won as it is knowing the rules. So if you are questioning whether this does apply to your industry or it doesn't, you know, whether you get an attorney that's educated in the FAR, or whether you get assistance from someone like myself or a PTAC counselor, somebody that's educated in the rules of government contracting and the acquisition process is who you want to absorb your training from. Not necessarily somebody that won a contract in janitorial for $100,000 and is now trying to charge you $7,000 for a course. I'm not mentioning any names, and they're not all like that, but it's definitely created a lot of confusion in the industry in the last 18 to 24 months or so.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I think we can all do best to avoid some of those things. So one thing that I want to ask you, right, when it talks to, talking about why researching actually matters, when you look at a company looking for customers and you look at where we're at in a market where if you sell it, the government's going to buy it, where do you start off? Where do you say, where should I be spending my time at? Where should I be looking? How can someone start to understand, if this is what I have to sell, then this is who I should be selling it to, even if my first assumptions might be wrong?
That's also a great question. I personally like usaspending.gov. I mean, there's more than one way, obviously, but USA Spending allows me the freedom to play with the search filters, right? Whereas SAM ad hoc reports, which is also another option, you have to, there's kind of a big learning curve in using the SAM ad hoc report. So if you're new to contracting and you don't already know how to work with the ad hoc reports, I would suggest a keyword. Do a keyword search in USA Spending. Identify what codes the government is using. It may or may not be the code that you selected from your SAM registration when you first registered. It will tell you the product service codes. It will also give an indication of the terminology that's being used in the contracts that you're going after, so that you can then later modify your marketing assets to speak their language, if you will. There's a lot of data that you can find out in USA Spending, even more so than what's available in the user interface. Downloading the full report will give you access to show you how many bids were received on a procurement. It will show you whether or not the solicitation appeared on SAM, if it did, when, and what was the number. It'll tell you if a procurement card was used to purchase that good or service. So there's a lot of really strategic information that we can uncover just looking at past spending, knowing that 70% roughly of what the government buys, they buy over and over and over again. So if there is a market for a product already, I would definitely say use USA Spending. If you have a new product or a new innovative solution that you're offering to the government, you can use past spending, but it will be a little bit more of an organic sales strategy, whereas you're actually doing the outreach and convincing the government that the need does exist, which tends to be a little harder, but it does happen all the time.
So let's say that you go in and you do some of your basic research and you say, hey, there's this customer over here that's buying what I'm selling. you feel confident in your service, should you just cold start writing proposals to bids? Should you try to meet those customers? What to you is some of the initial administrative tasks, best practice tasks to do before you start chasing after those customers you just found out buy what you sell?
Well, for one example, if I determine, it's not enough to know at the agency level, you really want to kind of drill down to the procurement office because, we'll take the Army, for example. There's military bases all over the country that buy and sell, that buy products and services. So each of those bases have their own set of staff and their own procurement team. They might even have their own set of pain points that may or may not be the same as the other jurisdictions, maybe because of geography, for example. So all that to say that there are different humans sitting beside each and every one of those desks, and you should make it your mission to know who those humans are, what their pain points are, so that you can strategically communicate when you're bidding, when you do go to prepare a response to a solicitation, making sure that you're speaking specifically to those pain points and essentially, being able to leverage that market intel will also allow you to ghost your competitors early in the acquisition process during the sources sought and RFI. So I do not believe that registering in SAM and bidding right out of the gate without any intelligence is a wise use of resources. No.
How much damage do you do during an initial interaction with, if you have the opportunity, right, to meet one of those customers that you're going after and you give them a generic elevator pitch for your company? How much damage can you do as a new business or a small business trying to expand into a new customer?
I've had a lot of companies come to me over the years and say, I sent my capability statement to so-and-so, and I'll say whether this is your elevator pitch or whether it is on your capability statement, you kind of want to tailor that to your customer. I mean, we've all learned, when we started our business and we developed our business plan, market segmenting is one of the very first steps to executing and building your business. So if you're not segmenting your market in the government, you're more or less marketing to the masses, and not everybody cares what you do. So you want to make sure that you're reaching the right people with the right message. And again, I refer back to the pain points. Everybody's pain points are not all the same. So knowing the pain points that your solution solves for each of your customers is definitely going to give you a strategic advantage.
Perfect. And you said a couple of things there I think are pretty important, right? Whether it's your marketing slicks or your elevator pitch, making it, tuned into what the customer cares about. But there's also the idea of understanding what your identity is as a customer and aligning that with your marketing. So how much of this initial preparation to go after a new customer, to prepare a business to come into the federal market, how much of it should be focused on what is it that we exactly do and making sure that we have a very concise and clear description of what we offer as a company?
That's super important. I will give one use case. I had a customer come to me. He was an expert in water purification, and he sells products and services in that space. He said, Ashley, I've captured 60% of my market, and I know there's more business out there. I just can't find it. Come to learn that the other 40% of his customers utilize the words water filtration instead of purification. So that's a very simple real world example of how tailoring to your customer could mean everything. And we detected that through contract data specifically. It's a lot of geographic regions use different terminology, and it's the same in government contracting. Learning the FAR and all the acronyms is hard enough for a small business. So really honing in on those terms and those acronyms that your potential customers are using will save you not only a lot of time, but it will help you when you step up to the plate, communicate with them effectively and tailor your pitch to their terminology and their way, more or less.
So the last thing that I would say there, right, before we move on to the next slide, is we've covered a lot with this, but as you do, this workup, right? Let's say you do everything the right way, but you do want to get that face time with that customer. What are some of the best practices? What are some of the best places that you can go? Where should you be visiting, whether it's virtual or real life, to try to get in front of some of those customers, or at least start getting your name out there in the right places?
That's a great question. I would make sure, number one, that the small business liaison officer, SBLO, in the agencies that I'm targeting has my capability statement on file. One reason is they can be a great referral resource. Another reason is they're usually charged with doing the market research to identify sources. So I would always recommend, when doing that outreach, make sure you name your capability statement strategically. You know, don't just name it Q1 capability statement, name it with your company name and then your core competencies, so it's easily found in a database search. I would also say to attend their events. So some agencies have, their own process for receiving you. You can beat the door down, call all you want, but if you don't show up in that networking event first, you're not put inside their funnel. So some agencies prefer for you to receive the education before you even meet with them. Another reason it's important to know who they are and what their processes are. The next thing I would say is conferences are a great way to meet your targeted buyers. Make sure that when you're planning which events you're going to attend throughout the year, that you look at the roster, who's going to be speaking. Is there going to be if you're in the IT industry and there are IT project managers on the roster, you absolutely want to be in that room. Research who's in the room before you go. And if it's an in-person event, make it a point to introduce yourself and make a good first impression. I've had clients win contracts just because they sat next to somebody at a conference table in an unassigned seat that happened to be a contracting officer at such and such agency. So relationships are a big part of this. If you're not dedicating 80% of your time to relationships and 20% to solicitations, you might be taking more of a reactive approach to government contracting than proactive.
Perfect. Hey, can we move? Thank you, sir. SAM registration. Okay, so I think this is a mystery to everyone out there, because I mean, obviously it's changed so much over the last couple of years. I mean, especially with the move from the old SAM registration, and then back with it when it was CCR into what it is now. Tell us a little bit about some of the best practices here, right? What is it that you want to do before you start this registration process? What is it you want to do during the registration process? Whether it's a compliance standpoint or whether it's a look your best to your potential customers, what is it that's really important during this step?
That's an excellent question. So as far as SAM, for those who may not be aware, even if you've been registered for 10 years, you probably face some challenges in 2022. What happened was Dun & Bradstreet lost the contract, and that was then recompeted and awarded to Ernst & Young. That means that the government's using a different database to match your company information, which has created a lot of problems for contractors, especially new ones and those who have been in business for 20 years, because the paperwork is outdated. Best practices before you even log into that system, make sure the IRS has a correct address on file for you. Make sure also that that address is not a post office box or a virtual address. SAM does not like those addresses. So even if you file your taxes at a post office box, for this particular process, you're going to have to go change that to a physical address before attempting SAM. There have been several clients, countless clients, who have been pretty much in this endless cycle of validation because there's something on their documents that isn't right or doesn't match, but there's no obvious explanation for what that might be. The second thing is your articles of organization. So there are two pertinent documents for SAM. You want to have proof, an official document containing your company name and your physical address. The second document is your company name and your formation date. Those are the 3 points that SAM wants to verify immediately before they give you your UEI number. Once your UEI is assigned, you are not done yet. The UEI has replaced the DUNS number, so you will still need to proceed through the full registration process to get your cage code now. Something else that you can do in preparation for that process is go into USA spending. You'd be surprised the amount of IT contracts that were put under an engineering NAICS code, or construction or remodeling services thrown under facility support. So the NAICS codes that your government is using, your government buyers are using, is what should be on your profile, not only the NAICS codes that you think seem to match what it is that you do, because it's not always so black and white. I would also say the most common errors that are made, people say no to the credit card question. And believe it or not, Sam is hooked up to DSBS, which is sort of a market research site. And if you say that you do not accept credit cards, any buyer who might be trying to purchase something quickly with a procurement card would not find you in their search result. So if you sell products and you can sell products for under $10,000 or services for under $3,500, go get yourself a free Stripe.com account just to be able to say yes to that question. Super important. The FAR responses, obviously your reps and certs, your FAR responses and DFAR responses do have to be accurate and complete, and those are more or less spit out to you depending on the NAICS codes that you submit. So that does seem to generate a lot of questions. If you have this NAICS code and you've never seen that FAR response before, if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out, or even to your local PTAC. Sam has definitely been a bear this year, for contractors new and old. As far as any additional SAM errors, I will bring your attention to, once you submit, you'll go through two processes, the IRS and the CAGE validation. DLA has been sending a lot of emails that require a response within 3 days. If you don't respond to that email, they send you all the way back to the beginning and you have to resubmit and keep waiting. So my best, and if you take nothing else away, take this away. Do not wait until the last minute to renew your SAM, guys. Start 2 to 3 months in advance. You'd rather have the time and not need it than need it and not have it, go inactive and not get paid.
Yeah, that's certainly a painful thing. I do feel like getting a SAM registration is kind of like getting a GSA schedule these days with how long it actually takes. So
good analogy.
Yeah, so Nate, if you wouldn't mind. So completing I think this is something that gets really overlooked. I think because most people have no idea where this website actually is. It's not the easiest website in the world to find. So tell me a little bit about why this is so important, and what again are some of the best strategies and some of the pitfalls that you've seen when people are creating this profile.
So DSBS stands for Dynamic Small Business Search, and it's basically a small business database hosted by the SBA. When you register in SAM, when you put in your revenue and your employees, average over 3 years, in your size calculation, if SAM deems you as a small business, you automatically have a profile in DSBS. A lot of that SAM information is ported over to your DSBS profile, and it's searchable in the market and in any phase of contracting. But what I've learned is that the government, when awarding you a contract, will go and check your DSBS profile prior to that award, especially if it's a set-aside contract. They are working on the system for it to communicate with all the certifiers, which would be the SBA for HubZone, for VOSB now, and for WOSB. So your set-asides will automatically be reflective in that profile very soon if they're not already. The reason the DSBS is so important is because when your profile magically appears there, it's not easily accessible, and you cannot complete the manual entries from SAM. So a lot of businesses will skip the manual entries, which leaves them having no keywords in their profile. They don't have a capability narrative. They haven't added their references. And the trick here is you actually have to go to a third website, which is the general login system, to even request access to DSBS. I've also seen a lot of businesses who, in their SAM process, maybe they had to get a new UEI, or for whatever reason, their DSBS profile was wiped out. So even if you've completed DSBS in the past, I would highly recommend going back and just checking to make sure that your answers are still present, because those keywords and that capability narrative is, think of it like search engine optimization, right? If I'm punching something into Google, I want relevant results. Well, same thing if I'm a contracting officer or a small business liaison trying to find a small business to source from, I'm going to punch in what I'm looking for. I might not punch in a NAICS code. I might punch in a keyword. I may be looking in a certain geographical region. I may be looking for only companies with references listed or only companies that take credit cards. Either way, the search filters in DSBS provide prime contractors and government agencies the ability to, start their source selection and market research process. So you do want to be found when the government's looking, and essentially you won't have to work as hard chasing them.
So a couple things out of that. You hit on the keyword issue, and I've been in DSPS for I mean, I can't remember how many years I've been using that tool now. It's got to be 15 or 16. But what I've really recognized in the past is you go into a small business profile and you see the kitchen sink. It's just everything.
Yeah.
It is listed in there. So when you're doing something like this, and then really in reference to your marketing as well, how important is it to sort of stay away from the temptation to be the jack of all trades and be true to who your company is?
That's an excellent question. And I would say, so here's the thing with the government. They don't want to do business with a jack of everything, master of none. They're very concerned with risk, right? Even more so than price. So it's hard enough being a new contractor without experience, trying to get an agency to take a chance on you. But if you on your CM profile, on your DSBS, and on your capability statement are saying that you're a janitorial expert, you're a drywall expert, you're a landscaper, and you provide transportation logistics services, I, as the government, would question whether you're good at any of those things, because these are very different industries. So even if you are one who has been in business for a while and you have started to expand into other industries, you do want to make sure to add product service codes to your profiles to make sure that you're clearly articulating, because NAICS codes are just meant to track the budget. They're not really depicting what it is that you do. So if I'm an IT company and I have, 541, 512, 11, 13, and 19, I might also add 541, 310, but I'm going to have the product service codes to support that I'm in the IT space. So you really want to present yourself as an expert in your industry and tie in your experience, even if it's not for the government. Maybe it's city, state, and local contracting. Maybe it was another company you work for, you have a buddy down the street. Even if if you have no experience and you're using professional experience, to base your business off of, there's a time and a place for that. Even that's okay. But to go into an industry and say, I have a lawnmower, I'm a landscaper, that's not really what the government is looking to see. And that won't really give them a warm, fuzzy feeling to award you a multi-million-dollar contract. The last thing that we want is a negative CPARS review, because what happens if you actually do win and it comes time to perform? That CPARS review will either make you or break you. It will follow you pretty much forever. So make sure that when you do go to bid on a contract, that you are able to fulfill and deliver. That you already have your team in place and these relationships built. If you win a solicitation, win a bid, or win an award, and then you go and find, your subcontractors, you're way behind the curve. So definitely be proactive to make sure that your business is situated and not debarred, essentially.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned PSC codes, and then earlier in the conversation you had mentioned, sort of the catch-all that is 541330. Can you tell us a little bit more about why, in combination with your own identity and with really understanding the customer that fits you best, why it's really important to understand that if you're an IT contractor, it's not just 5415 something. And does learning those PSC codes as part of let me understand myself and my market better. What benefits does that offer you down the road, when it would be super helpful to have that, but you don't, so you just keep on pushing forward?
Well, that's a good question. NAICS codes, because they were developed for budget tracking, when the government agencies put out their procurement forecast each year, they tend to code based on what they have room for in the budget. So if you're in an industry where it's not always like, we can't always plan for everything, right? Hurricanes happen. FEMA is a great example. FEMA doesn't know what they need before they need it. So it's kind of hard to plan for disasters in that case. So I'll use that use case. Having the product service codes not only give the impression that you understand your market and demonstrate that you have done your research, they help you to appear, even if you're new at this, more responsible and responsive. Product service codes, for example, I have seen contracts in USA Spending that don't even have a NAICS code assigned to them, but I've never seen a contract that lacked a product service code attached to it. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. If I don't have room, if I'm a government agency and I spring a leaky roof, I didn't plan for that roof repair, I'm going to have to, take that out of a separate budget. That's probably going to go under facility support, not roofing contractors. And the reason is because I didn't put that in my forecast. I wasn't planning on that happening, but I still need it repaired and I need it done now. So it's important to know, like if you're an IT company and you're building a custom system, like Jim, like you would, if you're building a platform, you are in essence engineering a system. So the government's able to justify that NAICS code being relevant. There are limitations to that, NAICS code, a contract being under the wrong NAICS code has been grounds for a protest in the past. Whether that was held up or not, depends on the case. However, the government is cautious when they assign the NAICS code. It just may differ from what you think your NAICS code is or should be. So being sure that you are speaking their language, NAICS and product service codes falls right in that bucket.
And sort of the last, thinking about the idea of doing SAM, understanding your customers, your DSBS profile, all of that, you're going to have the NAICS that you have. And I'm sure that you would caution people on don't put every NAICS code and every PSC code out there. But what happens when you identify that the customer I want to chase after seems to have a trend for taking the work that I would do and putting it underneath a NAICS code that maybe I don't have experience in? Is that a non-starter? Is that a get away from that? It's being hardwired for someone else. It's going under a vehicle. What are some of the takeaways if you're seeing that happen a little bit too often, where you can't read the tea leaves off the NAICS codes until you're doing keywords or PSC code searches?
I would add the NAICS code to my profile, first of all, and do a little bit more digging as to why. That would be a reason that I would want to reach out. I would probably ask during the Q&A phase, in an effort to influence that acquisition, especially if you're in a past performance heavy industry like IT. You can't get on a NASA soup if you haven't jumped through all these fiery hoops first and worked with other government agencies. So it becomes important to understand the why, but I would definitely have it on your profile. Just because you haven't had past performance in that particular NAICS code, it may just be that type of work was coded as something else in the past, but I still want to use that past performance to relate if it matches the scope of work. So in that case, I would say the NAICS code would be less important, just in my experience. But I would definitely still want to detect the why, and I would still want to add it to my profile, because I can't really change the mind of the government in all the cases, but I can do my due diligence to make sure that I qualify for it when it comes around again.
And then with the DSBS system, it's obviously a tool that you can use a couple of different ways, right? You can put your information in there. You can go search for potential teaming partners, right? If that was the use case of it, what other data would you want to layer on top of, oh, I found this company, in order to sort of vet, is this going to be a quality teammate for me? Are they going to get me in front of the right customer? Are they going to help me get the right past performance? What are some additional layers of market research that you'd want to lay on top of a couple profiles to narrow it down to one or two?
So I use a combination of systems for this. It starts with USA spending. If it's a small business that I find that I'm interested in, I'll go pull their DSBS profile, grab their UEI from there, and then go check their past performance history. All the while I'm making notes, because it's impossible for me as one company to reach out to these 10,000 prime contractors. But if I'm narrowing it down based on my strategic advantages, in process of elimination, for example, I know that I want to break into Department of Energy, and these 3 companies have an extensive relationship with DOE. I'm going to prioritize those 3 companies based on their past performance record. Whether or not they're in, they could be in your same NAICS code. They could be doing exactly the same thing that you do. They might even have the same set asides you do. But there's nothing to say, because if they're winning awards, exceeding the simplified acquisition threshold, it's reasonable to assume that 20% of that will have to go to a small business such as yourself. And if they have a lot of past performance, you can look at the SBA size table and figure out, when that prime contractor is not going to be small anymore. Make sure you get in the door before that. That's how teaming works. Today you might be bidding against your teaming partner, and tomorrow you might be bidding with them.
Perfect. All right. So digging back into that capability statement, I think it's one of the most underutilized capabilities or marketing pieces that a company has. I often, having done, I've lost count on how many vendors I've done research on throughout my career. What I will say is opening up a IT company or professional services company and basically seeing the exact same services time and time and time until there is no differentiation. So
right.
Help us understand a little bit more about when we're going to respond to something like a sources sought or a white paper, and we're going to stick in a capability statement, or on top of good content, right? We're going to send that back. Or if we're going to meet somebody, how do I stand out from the crowd with a capability statement that makes me unique?
Well, you definitely want to remember exactly what this is. Like, this is marketing. So don't forget those marketing 101 fundamental principles. You don't want paragraph heavy, just text heavy content. You've got literally 6 seconds to get someone's attention. So I will disclaim that with, it does depend on what you're using it for. Like, if it's for general marketing, it could be solicitation specific, it could be agency specific. And I would always recommend tailoring your statement to the agency when appropriate, because again, going back to those pain points, differentiation does tend to be the hardest part that I've seen for small businesses, even those who have been in business for years. Those that have government contracts are still working on their differentiators. Part of that is business development. It may not be completely apparent today what makes you different than your competitor. But I'll use some real world examples. Take the transportation industry, for example. In a lot of cases, those aren't very apparent. So yes, you have a 99% on-time delivery rate. That's great. That's a differentiator. You have a real-time GPS tracking of all freight accessible to the customer. That's a differentiator. Not all companies have that. So you really do have to understand your market, who your competitors are, and what they're offering to the government to be able to successfully differentiate yourself. If you are looking at the past spending and you're paying attention to who's winning, this becomes very easy to do. I use SAM award notices for that. If I see an award that was in my space, that was a scope that I'm interested in, I'll go and research that company, figure out what they have that I don't have, and I will start to get it. That will literally be my to-do list. I'll also take a look, you can exercise FOIA requests here too. And when applicable, they won't always send you the responses, but if you are interested in more details about an awarded contract, you can always submit a Freedom of Information Act request, and it might take a while. You might have to stay on them, but it can be done. But really targeting your customer and speaking in your capability statement, I always make reference to your professional resume. You know, when we were pursuing our professional careers, you have a habit of keeping your resume up to date. And that's what your capability statement should be, a working document. It is never a one and done. You're always going to continue to update it. Next time you get, you know, a larger customer, a Fortune 500, maybe you got your first contract with a federal agency. You want to remove, you know, maybe one of those old commercial contracts and replace it with a results focused description from the government agency. So make sure that this is constantly a work in progress. Make sure that you know who your competitors are. And another place that you can look, if they have a GSA schedule, I would definitely say look up their schedule and pricing and terms and conditions on GSA Library. I would also use fpds.gov or USA Spending to punch in their UEI to see their past performance, and you can kind of prioritize that way. You might even tailor your capability statement to the prime contractor you're reaching out to, you know, with the same things in mind.
And so in addition, right, on your capability statement, you want to have some past performances mentioned on there. Do you find that most companies will shy away from their subcontracting past performances, maybe not put that on there? Do you think companies need to be more effective at demonstrating, hey, even though this is past performance from teaming, it's still quality past performances? So
yeah, Jim, what I
work
learned,
that in?
a lot of companies don't even realize that they have federal past performance as a subcontractor. And in a lot of cases, I've really had to kind of talk through their experience with them. Like, tell me what you've done since your business has been open. Okay, who did you do that for? Who paid you? How did you get paid? Where was the work performed? Oh, it was performed on MacDill Air Force Base. Okay, so the Air Force was the end user. And then their eyes light up when they realize that they can use that work as past performance. So what I recommend and what I give to my own clients at Dual Dev is I give them a past performance, sort of an experience worksheet, right? And I ask them to get in the habit of logging every job that you've done and collecting certain data points for each job. Some of those data points off the top of my head are obviously the start date, the end date, the dollar amount of the contract, the contract number, if applicable. You know, commercial contracts don't have a contract number, but not to just say, do this for government business, do this for all business. And while it's fresh in your mind, when you close out that contract and end that job, write a results focused description. What value did you bring to the table? And oftentimes that can even be more powerful than your differentiators. So if your past performance section is well written, it will be more or less the leading content that your readers will be focused on. And I will add to that, I get this question a lot. If you're a subcontractor working under a prime and the prime is the incumbent, whether you are named in that contract or not, you are still a sub. It is completely appropriate for you to use the government agency's logo as long as you're providing context and you are clear about your role on the project. So for example, if I did work with the DoD under CACI, I'm going to say Department of Defense was the end user, subcontractor to CACI, and I'm going to really wow them with what I brought to the table on that contract. Ideally, we do want to be a named sub because that's how you get a CPARS review. And again, that follows you. But even if you're not named in the contract, and it happens all the time, you still are able to take credit for that. So make sure that you are using all that you have at your disposal and thinking through that past performance to make sure you're making a good first impression.
Perfect. So then I guess we've done all of our homework, right? Now there's a solicitation out on the street, but if we back up just a little bit, right, in between those two things, tell me the importance of you're in the forecast to sources sought phase. How important are those two phases, and really what should you be doing at that point in time, and not, as you said, being a very reactive company writing a bunch of bids or writing a bunch of proposals to as many solicitations as you can find?
They are definitely time consuming, especially if you're writing proposals. You know, RFQs may not be as laborious, But I know for sure in the services industry, writing a proposal can be very costly. So make sure you're allocating your time and resources wisely. For example, in some of my clients' go, no-go analysis, they have I met with the client? If they say no to that question, they won't bid. They'll ask themselves, did I detect this on the procurement forecast? And if they didn't, they won't bid. So to start there, to get the furthest ahead of the game, you look at the past spend. Then you want to, out of those agencies that buy, you want to look at those procurement forecasts. Is there anything on the horizon this fiscal year that match my profile? If you find, and the forecasts are not incredibly, they're not going to provide you with all the information you need, right? We'll be lucky if we find a point of contact on there. Usually the point of contact, though, is the contracting officer. That's probably the only time I would recommend reaching out to a CO directly, unless obviously you're in the procurement cycle. When you detect something on the forecast, that is a great time to jam your foot in that door and have, use that as a leaping off point to open the door for a conversation. Learn about their pain points, because what a lot of people don't realize is if it's just on the forecast and it's not a solicitation, they can talk to you and they're encouraged by the FAR to do so. So that's that should be your key, to put your investigator hat on, go into PI mode and start learning what you need to know, because when that procurement becomes a solicitation, you will have already met with the procurement staff. You would have been looking out for the sources sought notice or RFI, whichever is appropriate for the industry. And you would have had an opportunity to get your input in and potentially formulate or have a say in the requirements of the acquisition. You also are making friends in the agency. Even if you don't win, oftentimes that's a great way to make a relationship with the prime who did win. If a government likes your response, they do talk to each other. If you're the prime contractor, you might be sharing an office with a program manager at DoD. And, when you're working in the same office, you get to know each other. You get to know a lot about what's coming down the pike that may not be accessible on any platform yet or any procurement forecast, but you really get to know what the pain points are. So you kind of got to crawl before you walk, number one, and make sure that you are influencing the acquisition. If you're waiting for a solicitation, there's been at least 6 or 8 steps prior to that you've missed out on. So start by reviewing those procurement forecasts without a doubt, to keep it simple.
And so when you get to the sources sought phase, when it comes to that response, how important is that? Obviously, right, there could be money on the line down the road, but when it comes to making an impact on a new customer, on an existing customer, what's the importance of responding to that sources sought? And then what are some of the key things you want to focus on within that actual response?
Definitely be responsive. So what I've seen very common in the past couple of years is the government will put out a sources sought notice and they'll request a custom capability statement that answers the following questions. That's your key. You're going to have to edit your capability statement and tailor it to that agency. So make sure that you clearly articulate to each point. The sources sought notice is also a great way to bring up points that the government may or may not be aware of, and try to go certain requirements that you may expect to be in the solicitation and try to influence that to include things that would benefit your company, right? So, and I'm trying to find an example off the top of my head, but one's not coming to me quite apparently. The sources sought, everybody assumes that because there's not a dollar figure attached, oh, I'm bogged down, I'm busy, I don't have time in my schedule to respond to this, somebody else will respond to it. That's not always true. Sometimes the government doesn't get any responses to a sources sought notice, which obviously doesn't make their job any easier. But there have been times where the government's awarded a contract in the sources sought phase because they've only gotten one response. And that's what they're doing. They are seeking sources. So if you're not showing up, you're not going to be included as a potential. You're not going to have the opportunity to influence the acquisition. And you're going to constantly be looking at Sam thinking, oh my gosh, this feels like it was written for somebody else. Well, it probably was, because they engaged early and they had a say in what went into the requirements. So definitely use the sources sought and use that pre-acquisition, the market research phase of the procurement cycle to your advantage, especially as a small business. Speak up and make your voice known. Let them know that you're there.
All right. And then just one quick question before we get into the questions from our audience today. But for those growing companies out there, companies that are first coming into the market, how important is it that the president / BD guy who doesn't have a lot of technical writing experience stays away from writing anything at all? I mean, what's the importance of having a good technical writer on the team and not saying, hey, I'll write the responses to all these sources sought?
It's very important. I have actually seen contractors who are trying to hire virtual assistants as technical writers. Not the move. I would highly advise against that. You not only want to choose somebody who's familiar with the acquisition process, but also somebody who is a technical writer. Whether or not they wrote, on federal contracts and won is less relevant than if they are a good writer. So from everything from your capability statement to your marketing email to your federal responses, if you're not going to take the time to learn yourself, you're going to have to find somebody credentialed, whether you outsource it, whether you hire as a W-2 in-house. I find that contractors will hire a W-2 quicker if they have their own process set up. If they don't have their own proposal process, they're more likely to outsource something like that. But what you can do to set yourself up to take either direction, whether it's hiring internally or outsourcing, is have yourself a content repository. Every time I've tried to hire a proposal writer or find one for my clients, that's the first question they ask is, do you have content already written? Because if they're going to have to organically write all of your content about your business, it will cost you. So if you have a good start and maybe you bid on a couple solicitations already, go back to those completed documents, copy the requirement, paste it, copy your response, paste it, and build it in an Excel spreadsheet if you don't have a system. As long as it's there, it's much easier for someone to step into that role and say, okay, let me correct this content rather than let me just write it organically, because you know your business better than anybody else. It's unreasonable to think that you can throw this on someone's plate and walk away. Like, you're going to have to be involved, and you'll eventually have to develop your own internal process.
Perfect. Well, Ashley, thank you so much. At the moment, Nate, I'll go ahead and hand it back over to you if you have any questions from the audience for Ashley.
Yes. So one of them is, how do you find the names / contacts of a procurement office and team? Are they listed online?
Great question. So depending on who you're trying to reach, the answer for that is different. On sam.gov, you will notice that on every solicitation, you'll have the contracting officer's contact information. Sometimes the liaison's information is also included there. Now, if you are reaching out to the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization, trying to contact the SBLO that way, you can look on the procurement website. What you will have trouble finding are the project managers. They're not really the persona that wants to receive your marketing, but I will say one superpower since COVID is LinkedIn. If you know the agencies you're targeting, there are over 3 million employees on LinkedIn, guys. And usually if they have a LinkedIn profile, they keep it updated of what agency they're working under. So while they move around a lot, I find that LinkedIn is a very good way to keep my finger on the pulse of who's coming and going from the agencies and allow me an opportunity to break that ice and maybe get their email address, reverse engineer the old-fashioned way by reaching out and building a relationship with them.
Awesome. And another one is, if previous experience is as a consultant for multiple companies, how does that best displayed on a capabilities statement?
Good question. So I have a reciprocating question to that. My first question would be, how did you get paid by those companies? If you were paid as a W-2 employee, for those companies, then you would have to be very specific to say that this is professional experience. If you got paid as a 1099 through your tax ID, I would absolutely call that corporate experience, and I would follow the same format. I would show the end user, the company name. If unless it's in their agreement that you can't use their branding, most of the time it's okay. Sometimes they have specific partner logos that you have to use. So I urge you with caution on a case-by-case basis there. But write a results-focused description nonetheless. And oftentimes, if you're formulating your capability statement to respond to a requirement, leverage and sort of combine the requirements with your experience and pick out the similarities between the scope of this project and what I did for company A, B, and C, and speak directly to that synergy, if that makes sense.
Go ahead, Jim.
No, please go ahead. I was asking if there's anything else there for us.
Once the RFP is released, what are the do's and don'ts when reaching out to the contracting officers, KOs?
Well, once the RFP is out, then we are in competition phase, and really the only thing you're going to be doing is responding to the Q&A period. They can't talk to you. They cannot give you any strategic advice that they didn't release publicly. That is the wrong time to engage your contracting officer. If you didn't engage him or her prior to that RFP dropping, then you might want to wait till next time around, unfortunately. That's why it's important to kind of know who you're targeting so that you can jam your foot in that door before the solicitation ever hits.
And we'll go with this one as the last question. What is the best strategy on building relationship with OSDBUs?
So the small business liaison officers are literally, their role is to help bring in new sources, new small businesses for the agency to contract with. That is you. Therefore, they are, most of them are very free with information. They're very helpful. And when I'm reaching out on a client's behalf to the SBLOs, because what our process is make sure they know who you are and that they have your information on file. They have a direct ear to the procurement team, so they can be your very best friend. I take a position of would like to learn from you specifics, and I make sure to make references in that intro email that demonstrated that I did my homework already. You know, I've looked at the procurement forecast, I've been to the website. I don't want them to send me a generic template that says, go to your local PTAC. No, I have very specific questions and I want answers. So a lot of them, you know, you can just pick up the phone and call and, you know, ask a few questions, introduce yourself. Any opportunity to speak is an opportunity to pitch your business, guys. So whether you're in an event, whether you're picking up the phone networking with the government, or whether you're, you know, reaching out to prime contractors, same thing.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Ashley, for joining us today. If anyone would like to get in touch with Ashley or us, your contact information is here on the presentation, and the recording again will be sent out along with the link for upcoming webinars. Ashley, again, thank you very much. Jim, thank you. And hopefully we see everyone next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Ashley. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.